Hi, in this video demonstration we're going to take a look at something called the curve editor, which is where most animators tend to work using what we call curves to create nice fluid animations that slow when they need to and speed up when they need to using our 12 principles of animation that gets slow in and slow out. 3D Studio calls these tangents. We add slow and fast and a couple of others. So we're going to make a ball bounce without ever actually manipulating or moving the model of the ball itself. First things first, we need to make a bouncing ball. A sphere will work just fine for us. I'm going to go ahead and create this sphere in my top viewport. Click and drag. Move over to my Modify tab, and I'm just going to kind of round the radius down to about 15. And we can do some other prep, some other setup here, like moving where you want the contact point or the pivot point to be for our sphere. But we'll just leave this way for now. I might want to move my pivot point to the bottom where it's going to hit a little bit more often. But center, we don't need to do that. So let's just leave the ball the way it is for now. I'm going to make my color a little bit brighter, something that we can see a little bit easier. Bouncing red ball. And I'm going to give myself an initial position for this sphere. And I can move it. And we can set keyframes the way that we've been doing kind of in the past, but we're going to do it a different way today. We're going to animate this whole bouncing ball animation without ever physically moving our sphere here. First things first is I want to give it a name. I'm going to call this one bouncing ball. And I want to start, when you want a bouncing ball, it's got to start from up high. You either have to throw it or you have to drop it from a great height. So if I start down here at my XYZ coordinates, XYZ, and everything starts at 0, except for my z-axis, which is our up and down axis. We'll start it at 150. 150 raises our sphere for us 150 units from 0 point on the grid. I'm now going to kind of get rid of my grid there because it's going to look funny as it falls through the grid a little bit, which is one reason I may want to change my pivot point in the future. From here, we're going to do all of our animation inside what we call the curve editor. There's a couple of places, a couple of ways you can get to the curve editor. There are even two different kinds of curve editors, although they're pretty much the same thing. The regular real curve editor is up here under the graph editors menu, track view - curve editor, and it'll open a separate window for you. If you're working and you've got maybe two monitors or something, you can move one over to your other monitor, and this is a great way to work with it. If you've only got one monitor, you work on a laptop, something like that, I don't usually use this one. And so today we're going to actually use the mini curve editor, which is found down here by our timeline. You've got this button on the left-hand side of frame 0. And if you hover over it, it'll say Open Mini Curve Editor. Go ahead and click it, and it'll open the curve editor inside your timeline. In fact, your regular timeline is replaced with the curve editor timeline. You can kind of hover over between the white bar and the gray bar and click to rescale this a bit. And let's take a look at what we've got in here. We've got the close button, which will take you back out of your curve editor. To get back in, go ahead and hit that Open Mini Curve Editor button. You've got some regular menus. You've got some filters, move keys, slide keys, scale values, add keys. That's just like our set key, pretty much. Draw curves. You can actually draw your own curves. Here's all of our tangents, and if you're not sure what those are, you might want to go back and take a look at the tangents tutorial for making slow in, slow out, and physics take hold a little bit more, and some better choices for how movement works as far as speed. You've got some values along the curve, and you've got your good old pan tool, which will let you kind of click and drag, as well as a scale tool, and this very, very handy one, the zoom region tool. You'll notice that just clicking your middle mouse button allows you to pan just like it does up in this viewport. Rolling your middle mouse button will allow you to zoom in and out, just like the magnifying glass. You can also use the zoom region button to define. So I can zoom like way out here, and I say, oh, I want maybe this section here that I want to take a closer look at. And it'll zoom in as best it can and change both of your timelines accordingly. We'll use that one quite a bit. First things first, let's take a look at this left-hand panel here, where we've got everything that could possibly happen in our scene at our fingertips right here. From the environment, rendering effects, scenes, materials, sounds, everything. Including, if I scroll down here a little bit, just by kind of clicking out in the other empty gray area and grabbing it and dragging it up or down, the objects in our scene. Right now, all we have is this bouncing ball. Good thing I named it so I could find it a little bit easier in this very large menu, especially if my scene was populated with a lot more than just a bouncing ball. Underneath it, we've got the transforms, which we've got three different transforms, three different ways to animate and manipulate an object in our scene: position, rotation, and scale. Scale's pretty much, bigger or smaller, so it doesn't need the same axis that the other two need. Our position, this ball can travel in the X position, which would be forward, the Y position, which would be, side to side there, from what we're looking at it anyway. There we go. Just like your arrows up here from our move tool. And of course your Z position, which is the one we're going to animate right now for our up and down. To go ahead here, it's already marked. You can see this blue dotted line running right through the value of 150. If I want to zoom in, I can actually kind of zoom in on that a little bit more, maybe towards the end, maybe about to 70 there, and that'll give me a little bit better. Here's at the top of my animation. I can use the set key or the add key button to just kind of come in here, and right between the two yellow lines, which is now my slider, I can click to add a key. If I right click on that key, it tells me the values. At time 0, keyframe number 1 occurs at time 0 with a value of 150. And then it gives you the in and the out tangents, which we'll mess around with in a moment. For right now, just X out of there. Then I'm going to grab my slider and maybe move it to, frame 20 here, taking 20 frames to fall from the sky to hit the ground. If I turn on my auto key, all I have to do at this point, frame 20, is reduce my Z-axis to 0. The line will fill in solid because now we've got an animation between two keyframes. If I right click on this one, it'll tell me that my second keyframe is now at the time on the timeline, frame 20, and has a Z-axis value of 0. We've also got tangents. We'll worry about those again in a moment. If I kind of come over and we're going to start, see, we get our ball falling, perfect, and now we want it to bounce and rise again. I don't want it to take a full 20 frames because gravity tends to happen, and it'll start losing momentum. So it's going to bounce, travel up a little bit less high, bounce less, until it doesn't bounce any longer. So maybe 15 frames instead of 20. At this point, I'm going to come back over to my Z, and rather than 150 or 150 units, we'll just raise it about 100. You start to see how this curve works. Higher value to lower value to higher value. Again, we're going to go down to that lower value next. For our third keyframe, let's go to about, that is our third keyframe. For our fourth keyframe, let's go to about 45. We'll just drop it another 5 frames down to 10. And again, we're going to change that Z-axis to 0. It's creating keyframes because I've still got my auto key on. For the fifth, we'll go a little bit less. Instead of, we traveled 10 between that, so let's go with maybe 53. We'll go with 8. And we will raise it half that value again. So it's losing 50 units in altitude every time here so far. From 53 maybe to, we'll only do 5. We did 8 last, so we'll do 5 this time, maybe at frame 58. Back to 0. From here, let's just kind of, now we've really reduced drastically the number of frames here, so let's stay with 5 for right now and go to about 63. And we'll raise it up to, let's say, 20. And then our final keyframe here, we can go ahead and have, let's put it at 68. We'll just keep 5 there, and we'll reduce it to 0 again. That gives us 8 keyframes. Bouncing ball. If I go ahead and turn off auto key at this point, we don't need to create any more keys, and hit the play button, our ball moves up and down, but it definitely does not look like bouncing, and that's because our curves need to be changed. A bouncing ball, gravity works very specifically in very specific ways. Let's come back to our first keyframe here. If I select it, I can adjust the curves manually by using, let's say, our move tool over here and grabbing the Bezier. So I can actually create my own custom curves. I'm just going to Control Z to undo that. Or I can right click to open up our tangents window here again that I told you we'd be back to. Two different kinds of tangents at frame 0, value of 150. Our first keyframe is what this number up here tells us. And we've got two different tangents to worry about, an in tangent and out tangent. The in means as the frames are coming in to that keyframe, from the left side of it to the keyframe itself, toward the right. Out means leaving that keyframe, so from the keyframe itself to the right, out. Out and away from the keyframe, or in and towards the keyframe. Now, we don't have any animation on the right hand or the left hand side here of 0, so we don't need to worry about the in tangent on this one, just the out. In order to worry about the out tangent, we've got to kind of understand what gravity's doing to our bouncing ball. At its height, at its apex, it's going to be moving pretty slow. This is where it starts. It has to gain speed towards the ground before it gets faster. So if we start slow and end fast, that tells us which tangents to use. Again, if you don't understand what each of these is, either look it up in the 3D Studio help files or check out the tutorial about tangents. The ones we're going to be working with today are this little guy, which looks like the curve falls off quickly. That's fast. Or this one where it kind of arcs and falls down a little slower, and that's our slow tangent. Where our ball starts, we want it to start slow, so we add the slow tangent. It should kind of curve this a little bit nicer. From here, we can move to our second keyframe. I can just select it, and number 2 shows up at time 20, and it has a value of 0. This time we have both an in and an out, so we need to change both of them. At this point, the ball should be speeding up as it enters and hits the ground. So our first tangent should be set to fast. Likewise, as it bounces or springs back with all that force that just hit the ground with, it's going to spring it back out fairly fast and head back up, and then only when it reaches height again is it going to start to slow down because gravity's been pulling on it. So we're going to make both of these tangents fast. You can start to see what happens here. The curve starts looking like maybe the path of a bouncing ball. Another way we can get to the next keyframe is by simply clicking one of these arrows. Clicking over, it'll take you to the third keyframe at time 35 with a value of 100. The in and the out tangents we both have to worry about here as well, and it's up in the sky, so we can set them both to slow. I can click that arrow once again. Now we're down, so we set them both to fast. And we really start to see that bouncing ball arc or curve starting to look a little bit more like what you would imagine the path would be of a bouncing ball. Now remember, this is only for the z-axis, so our ball's still only going up and down, even though this path looks like maybe a ball that's been thrown a ways. We'll get to the other axes in a moment. The next one, I can come over here and just select it. Oops, there we go. And it's high again, so slow for both. And then I can do my arrows over again, and fast for both, and over again, and slow for both. And then my final keyframe, number 8, I only need an in tangent this time, so we'll make it fast. And that's where he will stop bouncing. He'll stay on the ground. And close this out now. I drag my slider back to 0 and go ahead and hit play. Our bouncing ball looks much better. A little stiff because it's going just straight up and down, but we'll fix that. From here, we've got our z-axis completed, right? So the next thing we want to do is make the thing move. If I go ahead and travel in my X position only, I had all 3 of these selected, so I was making keyframes on all of them. I don't really need all of these keyframes to make my ball travel forward. We're going to choose the X position, so if I just kind of rotate my actual scene here, we'll get the ball bouncing in this direction. If I go ahead and play it, right now we've got a bouncing ball that's bouncing just in one place. Let's come back here. If I select all of these keyframes just by kind of clicking and dragging a selection around all of them, I only need the first one and the last one. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit delete. If you didn't have those there, great. Just make one keyframe down toward the end. It ends at 68, which means as the ball hits its last one, the ball's going to stop completely. I may want it to kind of continue rolling for a little ways, just not bouncing any longer. So I might want to move this keyframe. I can do that a number of ways. I can just click and drag it and move it. I can right-click on it, and notice that time 68, I can maybe change that to time frame 75 so that it rolls for another 7 frames. That'll work. I also will change the value here. If I've got my value set to 0, then the ball's at 0 on the x-axis. If I want it to go forward along the x-axis, maybe 300 units, all I have to do is change that value. I don't have to have auto key on to do it because we're manipulating specific keyframes in our curve editor. From here, 1, 2, 3, and slide a little bit. If I wanted to move over even further, again, I can right-click these, and let's just say by frame maybe 80 or 85 will have the same value, so that when it bounce, 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 and then it slides a little bit and then comes to a stop. I want this one to slow, so I can actually change the intangent to slow here so that it kind of comes to a gradual stop. It gets slower as it moves forward. I might want it to start speedy here, so I can right-click on it. I've also got the ability just to select this keyframe here and come up here to the top where I can set it to fast immediately. So it's going to go fast, 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 slow. If that's a little bit too much, I can always set the tangent back to, select this guy and set it back to spline, which gives me a Bezier handle. And I can actually have full control over when this thing starts to slow. So maybe I'll make it a little straighter and then just curve at the top. And that gives me more control over how this is happening. There's distance. Let's talk about rotation. We can come down here to the rotation, and if I want to travel around, let's say the y-axis, since that it's traveling in the x-axis, it should spin around the y-axis. I can select the y rotation here. At frame 0, I can give it a keyframe value, just get my set key, and then click on the line to create one. And then at frame, let's say, what was it, 85, I think we stopped it at completely. I can give it another keyframe. If I wanted to rotate one full value around for this bounce, then for the second keyframe I can change the value to, remember we're working degrees now for rotation, 360. And my ball starts to something along those lines, starts to rotate. If I want it to rotate slower at this end, oops, I got to be careful not to make more keyframes. So I'm going to go back to my move tool. I can select this keyframe, right click, and set an intangent to slow. And then for the first keyframe, the out tangent maybe to fast. So it'll rotate faster towards the beginning and slower as it comes to a stop. There you have it. I go ahead and hit close on my mini curve editor. You'll find all your keyframes are there. And we have ourselves a bouncing ball animation. We can go a little crazier with this and add some scaling to it, some squash and stretch if we need to, but that'll be a different thing. I can also come back into my curve editor here, come back down to my Y rotation axis. Ooh, there, it's rescaled my arc for me a little bit. And I can actually start to add, let's see, maybe by frame 50, I can add another keyframe, and we can manipulate this even further. Maybe by frame 50, I want to give it a value of 2 full rolls, 360 times 2. So that's 720. Go over to the last keyframe, and then I don't want it to travel backwards. So whatever 720 plus 360 is, if you're like me, you're going to have to get a calculator out. 1080 is where we're going to want it to finally stop. That gives our bouncing ball a little bit more of a rotation. We get 3 full turns, and it rolls to a stop. Again, none of this means much unless it's got textures on it anyway. But there we go. Our curve's a little messed up at this point. This one, maybe we'll want to set tangent to linear or smooth, and maybe even adjust. Oops, I've still got my auto key. Undo, undo. There we go. Maybe even adjust our keyframes accordingly. Maybe I'll just pull that up to make that nicer arc. Set it to our spline tangent so that we've got those Bezier curves. And we can make that a little smoother. Until we are finished. Not too bad. Then, of course, all we need is a ground, which I can create a plane for. The plane will be pretty big, maybe 1500. And now our bouncing ball is falling through. So I'll reduce its z-axis, 0, 0, maybe negative 15. Since our radius on our ball was 15. Now we get that bounce. And there we have it. Animating in the curve editor without ever actually physically moving our bouncing ball.